So we're back. We have stopped, ladies and gentlemen, on page 63. So we have been discussing values and beliefs and attitudes and how that can help us in knowing this about our audience, knowing this about our listeners, being perceptive enough to figure out what their values or attitudes may be can save us a lot of trouble or lead us in the right direction by appealing to those values for, let's say, if we're especially trying to convince them to do something or motivate them to do something, or to, move them further in understanding of something that they already care about. Let's put it that way. Now, on page 63, there's a section that says discovering demographic and psychological factors. This is something that people rarely do and not always have a chance to do, but from time to time, you can do this, okay? And the answer is very simple. If you want to discover where the audience that you're about to address is, sometimes you just have to ask them, where they are. You can survey people. Yeah, sometimes, I've been known to stand up in front of people and ask them a direct question. And that's always a risk a speaker takes when they give the floor to somebody else who is listening. But I have asked an audience about whether they have been to a particular location, for example, or they know this particular area that I'm talking about. And I would have a number of people raise their hands and tell, yeah, I know, I've been there. I know what you're talking about. And all of a sudden now I know for a fact, I know this now, how many people are familiar with what I'm talking about, have been there, understand, seen it themselves with their eyes, and all of a sudden I have a connection now, where before I didn't. Now, all I did was ask a question, okay? I actually polled my audience. That's what I did. Now, doing that live in the middle of a speech sometimes is a little bit tricky, like I said, but it can be done. So you can learn about your listeners, about your audience, by asking them about themselves. You just have to know the right questions to ask and ask in the right way. And if they're responsive, then you're that you just confirm to yourself something that you might have been wondering about, maybe knew about it somewhat, but weren't sure, and now you confirmed it to yourself. So things like that. If you're speaking to an audience and it's really important to you that the audience is full of parents, for example, you could say, how many of you parents of young children? And you'll see how many people will raise their hands, right? And all of a sudden you realize that either it's majority who are parents, or there's just a few parents in the crowd and everybody else is single and they don't have any kids. And all of a sudden everything changes for you. And now the speech that you are going to make is going to go different, because either you have a crowd that is full of parents with young kids, or you have a crowd full of adults who do not have any kids, maybe not yet, or something like that. And that will change. That will change what you're going to talk about, and so this is one way of figuring out who your audience really is simply asking them a question. And that would obviously, give you a proper direction. Now, as far as the identities and the roles and affiliations that people have, this is a little bit more complicated, because people's identities are not, as I said before, they're not so static that we can just look at a person and figure out who they are. We can be, harshly mistaken about people's identities. Imagine a guy walking down the street, that's all dressed up in black. He's got black hair, lots of tattoos, and he's got a nose ring. He has, chains all over him, stuff like that. And you say, oh, wow, this person is into goth. They're into punk rock music, whatever. You start pegging them, you start figuring them out. And what you don't know, he actually doesn't care about any of that stuff. He's an actor. He just walked off the set. That's the danger that you run into by assuming that just because a person looks a certain way, that means that's who they are. And so when we talk about persons' identities and about their roles and affiliations, um, it's very hard to pin down. But when you're speaking on a college campus, you can pretty much assume that a lot of people who are going to listen to you, their role is a student or a teacher or an administrator, and so that's one thing that binds them all. When you're speaking at a Republican convention, you know that people are affiliated to a particular, party, the Republican Party. If you're speaking, at the sports club, you know that a lot of those people are either athletes or former athletes or huge fans of a sport or something like that. So you're already picking up on these characteristics right away if you have an audience that's specific enough or a venue that's specific enough, a situation, sort of say, that is, very concrete. So being able to access the identity of your audience could be a very powerful thing. It could be a huge ally in making your speech, which is why, when you do make your speech, I always give you like an imaginary identity. I tell people, okay, this is who you're speaking in front of, so make your speech as if this is your audience. That's kind of a exercise I like to give people. But so knowing the identities of your audience can change what you say, how you say it, what examples you use, and we've already talked about that. Although one's identities and roles and alignments are very difficult to perceive just with the naked eye. There's a chart here on page 64 that's really neat. I don't know if you looked at it or not. Sometimes these boxes people miss out on. It's really, really helpful. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you had to stand in front of people who are not on your side, let's put it that way, or you are not on their side. This particular piece of advice speaks about addressing an audience that's hostile. Okay, hostile audience. So imagine you are walking into a territory where people are not like you at all, and they don't believe what you believe, and they don't agree with you on some particular topics, and all of a sudden you have to speak in front of them. And that's a tough one. So what do? The advices over here they give you is really, really good. So first one, it says establish goodwill. And that's a very good advice. That means you just basically tell people that you care about them. I'm not here to be mean to you. I'm not here to make fun of you. I'm not here to, insult you. I care about you. I respect you. So you show people you respect them. They will respect you back. If they don't believe you, if they don't trust that you respect them, that they will not, obviously show you the kindness. And then once you show people that you respect them, even though you may disagree with them, you could still respect people. You start with the areas of agreement. You start with the areas where you do have common ground. So you build on something that you have in common. There's practically not a human being out there that I cannot build a common ground on. I mean, I don't care. Pick the most hostile audience that you think I would have, and I will find a way to build common ground. Okay? I mean, it's just, and just for fun, maybe we can do that. You pick an audience that you think that, I would be, not be able to speak in front of, that's hostile to me. And I'll tell you, I will find some sort of a common ground with them. You can always go to the most basic things that we all embrace, and then you start with an area of agreement, and then you can sort of say lay down the rules. If you know that you disagree with people on a particular issue, and you have to speak on that issue, you can basically explain to them how you will determine or how you will evaluate whether what you say is right or wrong, okay, or true or untrue, or reasonable or unreasonable. You kind of set up the rules. How do you judge my speech? How do you judge what I say? If I give you bad examples, then go ahead and disagree with me and say that my speech is terrible and trash. Okay. But if you give you good examples, and you can't argue with my examples, then you must accept that what I have to say is good, And if you're going to argue with me, don't argue with me on emotion, argue with me on fact, refute not me personally, but refute my opinion. If you disagree with my opinion on a matter, argue the opinion, don't argue the issue, don't argue with the person, sort of say. Because a lot of times these things are personal. So lay down the principles. If something is right, then something is right, regardless of who says it. Okay, everybody can understand that. Well, how do you know that something is right? Well, because it adds up or it doesn't add up. So whatever you determine, sort of say the sound judgment is, okay? And then you develop positive credibility. If you can create some sort of a links between you and them, maybe through personal example. Sometimes if people are hostile to you and you use your personal examples and you use examples from your life or your experience, that people will respond to someone if what they say is personal in a much more forgiving way than if what you present is not. If it's just hypothetical, if it's an idea or a thought, they will respond very differently to you. So, for example, when a person who is a victim of a violent crime is advocating for, let's say gun control or something like that in this country, people respond very differently to that person versus when a person is not a victim of a violent crime, or they're just a politician or somebody like that, and they're just talking about that, particular issue. So using your personal experience, personal examples, making yourself connected to your topic sometimes in such an intimate way can give you the credibility that you desire to have in a crowd that's hostile, basically. And then using supporting materials. If people are not let's say prone to believe you or to accept what you have to say, then you have to make the facts speak for you and present data, present information that is indisputable. Some other person that says what you said rather than you, and you could say, it's not me, somebody else said this. I didn't say this, somebody else said this. You want to argue with them, don't argue with me. So, and another good advice that they give here in this little box, it says, disarm your listeners with humor. And that's really true. If you make a joke and a joke happens to be funny to both you and them, laughing together makes people not dislike you less, let's put it that way. If they don't like you, but you say something really funny and you're making them laugh, they will like you a little bit more. Especially if they laugh together with you. If both of you find something funny, all of a sudden that's a point of a connection. That's almost a psychological thing, but it actually does work quite well. So, and then you can always be fair and play both sides. You can always, when speaking to an audience that's hostile or resistant to your idea or whatever it is that you want to communicate with them, that you know that they're rejecting it, you can always say, all right, there's this way and there's this way. There's this perspective and that perspective. And then you just play both sides. You say, if we do this, this is how it's going to go. If we do that, this is how it's going to go. If you choose that, this is going to happen. If you choose this, that is going to happen. And essentially, by playing both sides, you are being objective. You're giving both groups, one being represented by you and the other by listeners, you're giving them both the dignity and the ability to express their views. They don't feel like they have to listen to you, and you're not talking about their side of things. So you can present both sides, and that obviously makes you more objective and much more easier to listen, because if, for example, I disagree with you strongly about something, but you acknowledge my disagreement in your speech, then I am willing to listen to you much more than if you don't even acknowledge my disagreement. Let's say we talk about gun control, and I'm really anti-gun control, and you can say, well, yes, I know that you are very concerned with the amendment in the Constitution that says that we have the right to bear arms, and I know that you understand this issue, and you acknowledge my concerns, acknowledge my sort of say problems with this argument, and then you move on to your argument. I'm most likely to listen to you because at least I know you're informed of my opinion. Because if you don't tell me that, and you start into your speech, and you already know that I disagree with you, I will feel like I have to shut you up and tell you my side. So what happens? I'm not listening. I'm thinking of how this person is speaking. They don't know this, they don't know that, they don't understand this, they don't understand that. But if you begin with, I understand how you feel, and you lay out the platform that is the opposite of what you're going to say, then you have essentially disarmed me, because anything that I was going to say against you, you already said against yourself. You've already made the case against yourself before you even, sort of say, started that speech. So from time to time, you might find yourself in an audience that absolutely disagrees with what you have to say. And so that is one of the ways in which you can handle that disagreement, is to present the disagreement first, okay? By disarming the person of their own argument, essentially. You make the argument for them. And it's very effective. I've done that a number of times. It works every time. So when you know you have a divisive topic and you know you have an audience that is definitely going to disagree with you, that is a way to go. Anyway, these are great advices right here on speaking, sort of say, to hostile audience. All right, continuing on. Sorry, we got a little bit sidetracked here. I just love that box. I thought it was really good advice. All right, so continue on. So using the psychological profile that you've created. So now we've talked about demographic analysis, and we talked about psychological analysis. So basically, you can use what you perceive about your audience to frame your ideas correctly, okay? How you're going to approach the topic that you're developing is going to now be subservient. It's going to be affected by the audience you have. So that's going to change. I mean, obviously, your opinions are your opinions. But how you're going to organize your argument, the words you're going to use, the words you're not going to use, which approach you will take, will be now guided by your knowledge, okay? And how you choose your supporting materials will be guided by your knowledge. So an audience that's skeptical is going to need a large amount of supporting material. An audience that's not skeptical is going to need small amount of supporting materials. Knowing that you're trying to convince people to do something quite complicated might need a lot of supporting materials. Knowing that you're not trying to do that may not need a lot at all. Knowing the educational level of your audience, you could say maybe they can't handle some of the supporting evidence, and I'm just going to skip it and go for the emotional appeal. So there's a variety of ways in which you can sort of say adjust your supporting materials. An example that the authors give over here says, if you have a Jewish or Christian audience, then relying on let's say values that come from the Bible, for example, will get you there. When you're speaking in front of an audience that's secular, quoting the Bible is not going to help you. Why? Because they don't care. It means nothing to them. So why are you trying to support your words with something that doesn't really hold any authority from me? And that's using psychological profile of your audience. Knowing this about your audience brings you into a better place. And then, of course, finding the appropriate language for your ideas. If again, how far do you want to move people? What do you want them to do? Using a more forceful language or less forceful language, depending on what you're trying to do. But you can phrase your ideas in a very different ways. You could say essentially the same things and come down as really forceful, or you can come down a little bit, let's say, easygoing. And that really has to do with your audience. Is your audience all stirred up or not? And are they ready for action, or are they very passive, and no matter what you say, they're not really going to go and act anyway? So you analyze your audience, and based on that analysis, you phrase your ideas in such a way as to not try to push people into a direction that they're not ready to go, and therefore achieve a success with your speech, rather than set a goal too high and miss. That's another problem. All right, so how do you use your audience analysis in speech preparation, and what are some of the practical aspects? Well, one of the things that you do is you develop your speaking goals. If you know you're speaking in front of a particular audience, you can set appropriate goals for your speech. We talked about having different types of speeches to inform, speeches to persuade. There are some audiences that will not be persuaded so easily. So maybe you shouldn't try a persuasive speech on them. Maybe you should try just an informative speech. Because after all, maybe you're just trying to expand their understanding about something, okay? Or another audience is prone to receive a persuasive speech, or maybe they're ready to receive a persuasive speech. Maybe you have enough of a foundation to really make them, believe and embrace what it is that you are trying to purport to them. So essentially, you can develop your goal of your speech by leaning on the knowledge you have basically come by in the process of analyzing your audience. So if you are accurate and correct about your judgments, then you can develop an appropriate speaking goal. And that speaking goal will guide you and essentially will create your speech to be, one way or another way. Now, something that the authors say in this textbook is very true, is that they say, be realistic about the degree of change that you can expect from your listeners. Sometimes people think that if I just make this right speech, everyone's going to do what I say, and the world's going to be a better place because I just said what I wanted to say. Well, you have to be realistic about that. You have to say to yourself, how realistic is it that people are going to change their mind after what I said? And then another question is, how realistic is it going to be that they're actually going to do something about what I said versus just think about it? And this is where, sort of say, the big difference lie. If you perceive that your audience is ready for action, it's one thing. If you perceive that your audience is very passive and they're not ready for action, it's another thing. So the degree of change which you expect has to be realistic. And if you're trying to persuade people to adopt a healthier lifestyle, that's one thing. To do that, most people would agree with you. But if you bring in sign up sheets for Life Fitness and say, all right, I'm giving you an awesome deal, sign in a dotted line, $39.99 for the next 25 years or something like that, they're going to say, oh, no, I'm not signing a contract that's 25 years long. No way. Well, don't you believe in health and fitness? Yes, I do. But I do not want to sign a contract that's 25 years long or something like that. And so, again, a person, agrees with you hypothetically, but is not ready to move to the decision point. And this is where people run into trouble a lot of times, because they don't set realistic goals. So you can develop your speaking goals based on the analysis of your audience and knowing what they're going to go for and what they're not going to go for, essentially, okay? And then develop your speaking purpose. Your speaking purpose develops directly out of your goals. If your goal is to convince somebody, then you come up with what is it that you want them convinced to do. Do you want them to convince to the point of taking an action, or you just want them convinced to the point of agreeing with you? And so your specific purpose grows out of your goals. And this is how, knowing your audience, basically you are able to channel, sort of say, that knowledge into an appropriate degree, and based on that, your speech is going to be built one way or another. Okay. Another segment right here that needs to be highlighted. I think this is the last thing that I wanted to highlight from this chapter, and that's pretty much it. Is developing your appeals. This section is kind of helpful because it talks about audience segmentation. You realize, we already talked about this, that your audience is not always the same. They're diverse. You may have more than one group represented in your audience. And so to segment means to separate, or to set apart, to differentiate. And so audience segmentation is realizing that half of your audience is this and half of your audience is that. So let's say you're speaking to parents and children. All right. So half of your audience is parents and half of your audience is children. So how are you going to appeal to both of them? Well, you can't. So this is where you segment, and you basically come up with two different appeals that would work on two different segments of your audience. What will make sense to kids will not make sense to adults, and what will make sense to adults who are their parents will not make sense to kids, and vice versa. So you may have to actually have two different ways of saying the same thing, the same idea, because your audience is segmented. Okay, and you could still present your idea, but you may have to be very creative. So let's say you talk about video games or something like that. Then you're speaking to a group of mixed group of parents and children, and so you might have to be creative. And as long as you know you're speaking goal and you're speaking purpose, what is it that you're trying to accomplish by this speech, you can find a way to address the kids in the crowd in a meaningful way, and you can find a way to address the parents in the crowd about the same topic, but you will have to use different language and adapt that language based to the segment of your audience. Okay, and they will both hear what you're saying, but only one segment will hear the first time you said something for that segment, and another segment will hear it the second time. You won't be able to come up with a statement that will cover all bases, let's put it that way, in the same way. And so this is a technique whenever you have such differences, is to segment your audience into groups, into categories, and make an appeal in a multifaceted way, or make your pitch, or whatever you want to call it, make your point in a multifaceted way that it would work with both groups, or if there's 3 or 4, you may have to do a little bit more work. But basically, different people respond to different things. So kids might respond to emotion, and adults might respond to logic. So you might have to play with both. Hopefully this makes sense. I mean, I know that this chapter is a little bit more hypothetical because it talks about it's really not a way. There's not really a way of addressing this issue in a concrete way, because we're speaking about something so general. There's so many possibilities here. Once we get to a particular speech, a particular topic, a particular theme, and we start developing it, and we have a specific audience, then we can sort of say, work it out. But right now, it all sounds like theory, and I know it does, because it is theory. But there is a sort of say practical aspect behind all of that. You just have to be specific. And once you have this specificity, then all these principles and ideas that this textbook explains, they can actually be implemented. And so, but it's very difficult to talk about them when there's no concrete, specifics. So this chapter does cover quite a bit of generalities, and I'm hoping that it's helpful to you. And as you move forward to your next step, you will be mindful of how knowing your audience, this will help you. Now, in this class, you do know your audience. Your audience is your peers. It's me and your classmates, and that's it. So you don't have to worry about it that much. As far as for your speech, you address it to your class, and you can make certain assumptions about your class, which shouldn't be difficult. Okay, that's pretty much it. That's what I wanted to cover in this particular chapter with you. So I'm going to stop there.